Hi all, happy Monday. Welcome to the Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Levien, or Michel Levien, either's fine. And we are happy to have you and to be with you once again. As you know, the Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday language so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. Okay, as with every program, we will discuss a piece of news, a case, and a typology. In the piece of news, we talk about current events that are somehow related to corruption or anti-corruption and give you our opinion. In the case, we talk about relevant situations or cases, past cases, that are somehow important and that we wish to discuss with you and also give you your opinion. And in the typology, we teach you how to pay bribes and all that good stuff. Okay, so this week's news is... This week's news has to do with the New York Times. Now, this week, the New York Times issued a report prepared by two journalists wherein they accuse Siemens, GE, Toshiba, and Philips of paying bribes in the healthcare sector in China. So once again, China. Once again, China. Once again, Siemens. Once again, Philips. It's a whole blast from the past. Okay, so a little bit of context. Now, healthcare in China is public. That means that it's government-owned and government-funded. Now, the late development in China, the growth in the Chinese economy, now equals greater demand in healthcare services. So obviously, people in China are better off, and they are demanding more healthcare services and more quality in the services that they receive. Siemens, GE, Toshiba, and Philips dominate the imaging market. When we say imaging, we mean things like MRIs, X-rays, all that type of equipment that helps physicians diagnose diseases or conditions. Okay, now here the journalists they carried out an investigation and they claim that public officials are forcing these four companies to pay bribes. And they are doing so by demanding that the companies have to hire third parties or work through third parties in order to sell the equipment to the hospitals in China. Now, they are also claiming that through these third parties, the corrupt officials in China are cost inflating the devices up to 50%. So they are not only doing corrupt acts, but they are also making them very profitable, obviously at the expense of the Chinese people. Now, these companies have said that Chinese law forces importers to import that type of equipment through a local company, through a third party that will then sell to the Chinese government. So the way this works is, for example, Siemens does not sell directly to the hospitals, but the companies claim that Chinese law requires that a third party buys the equipment from the manufacturer and then resells to the hospital, to the public hospital, to the government official. Now, this is kind of tricky because it is not improper, it is not illegal to sell to someone so that person will resell your equipment to someone else. So here, investigators will have to really look into the motives and the intentions of the people that are carrying out these operations, because it is relatively easy to disguise paying bribes as operating through third parties. Why I mentioned earlier, I said once again Siemens, and this is because Siemens was accused in the early 2000s and up to 2008 of paying bribes to public officials in order to get contracts to sell equipment, medical equipment in places like, you guessed it, China and of course, Mexico. Now, what happened there was that Siemens was fined very heavily. Investigations in Germany and in the U.S. Resulted in a fine to Siemens of approximately $1.6 billion. And since then, Siemens has become an example of compliance and anti-corruption and anti-bribery. But here, again, it's kind of a tricky situation because they might be doing everything the right way, but if the public officials in China are manipulating the laws for their own benefit, so, committing acts of political corruption, and demanding that these companies sell through corrupt third parties, then they might not be entirely in the wrong. And again, it's kind of tricky and it's kind of subjective. and the investigations will have to delve so deeply into these conducts so as to determine whether or not the company had the actual intent, what they actually wanted to corrupt. So yeah, this is what's going on. Okay, so let's move on to the case. Now, today we will talk about Misonix. It is a company that trades publicly in the U.S. in the Nasdaq exchange, and they are in the business of manufacturing medical equipment. They make these very complex pieces of equipment that allow robots to perform surgeries and things like that. Okay. What was relevant about this case is that Misonix was involved. They settled the case. They signed a court settlement to resolve a case that involved corruption, but they didn't sign this settlement with the authorities. They did so with their shareholders. What happened here is that in 2016, Misonix detected that some people within their company and some distributors were probably engaging in corrupt acts in, you guessed it, China. And they approached the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission, which are the authorities that manage the FCPA, the U.S.'s law against foreign bribery. And they said to these authorities, Misonix said to these authorities, essentially it's self-reported. It confessed to having some irregularities and said maybe some of my distributors are paying bribes. Now, why would they do this? Well, these laws, the FCPA and the policies surrounding these laws allow for companies that self-report to get some type of benefit. In this case, a reduced sentence. So it benefits the company that finds some misconduct to confess. Okay. It's worth saying that here the Department of Justice and the SEC both closed their investigations into Misonix without sanctioning them, without any further penalties. But this is interesting. The shareholders of the company decided to file a derivative claim, a derivative suit against the management of Misonix. Now, what is a derivative claim? Okay, this is kind of tricky, a little bit of legalese for you. In a derivative claim, you sue one person on behalf of the other. So in this case, the shareholders of Misonix sued the management of Misonix on behalf of the company because they learned about the self-reporting in the FCPA case. And essentially what they said is, well, if the company is self-reporting, if it's confessing to the Department of Justice that there might be some corruption, then very clearly they don't have proper policies, proper corporate governance. And every person in management of a public company has what we call the duty of care. The duty of care. That is the duty of doing things the right way, of managing or doing their jobs correctly. So the shareholders in this case said, well, if you guys are paying bribes, then you're clearly not doing things correctly, so I'm going to sue you. And they did so, and well, the management of the company contested the suit. But eventually they reached a settlement, and that settlement states two things. Misonix now has to pay about $500,000 to the plaintiffs, to the plaintiff shareholders, and essentially for them to pay legal fees. But also they have to enhance their corporate governance, their internal practices and policies and rules and regulations and all of that. And why this is interesting is we often talk about how corruption cases are resolved outside of courts via settlements, but usually the settlements are signed between the accused party and some type of government authority, some type of law enforcement authority. But in this case, it wasn't that. It was just the shareholders acting using this tool called the derivative claim, forcing the company to beef up their compliance systems. So it's relevant because we wanted to let you know that there are tools that you can use, that the people can use other than law enforcement, to further anti-corruption and integrity. Okay, so let's move on to the typology. As you know, a typology is an example of something, an iteration or a model of something. So in this case, a typology for corruption it consists of the concrete steps that you need to follow to commit a corrupt act. Now, today's typology we decided to call "You Collect My Salary." Okay, so this happens well, this can happen pretty much anywhere, but this allegedly happens more in developing countries like Mexico. Now, the way this works is policemen are hired by a law enforcement authority, and they have a set salary. However, they are denied that salary. They are not paid that salary, and they are forced by their superiors to sign a proxy or a letter or a document authorizing someone else to collect that salary for them. And so they have no income, and instead they are forced by their superiors. They are told, if you want to keep this job, then you forfeit your salary. But good news, here's how you will make money. You have a badge, so you go out and you use that badge to make money. And the way they do it is they extort people. They exaggerate or they exploit minor misdemeanors, minor infractions, most of them traffic infractions, to get people who sadly don't know the law and they are unaware of their rights, to pay them bribes. And they subsist off of these bribes because then again they have no salary, and it gets even worse. Sometimes, in some cases, their income, in some cases they, in addition to forfeiting their salaries, they have to pay a percentage of the extorted gains to that superior. So it's kind of an interesting situation, because it is in many ways very similar to what is called the honeypot. They commit a crime in order to subsist, to survive, but they engage in corrupt acts that necessitate more corrupt acts, so they continue committing that crime. So they are engaged in a never-ending cycle of crime and corruption. It's actually very sad, and the saddest part is that they are actually being victims themselves of extortion, but they are ignorant as to what their rights are and what the law is, so they engage in this conduct. Okay, so that was it for today. Thank you for having us, and as always, I will leave you with this. Every act of corruption should be reported. Corruption should be denounced. So please blow the whistle, but do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're witnessing is corruption, or you're not entirely sure that you're safe, don't do anything before you act. Reach out to someone who might help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@streiner.mx, and we will be glad to help you. But above all, please stay safe. So this has been The Wife of Caesar. Again, I'm Michel Levien, or Michel Levien, either's fine. And happy Monday.